I wanted to tell a story about the dynamic system of National Socialism, and I wanted to tell a story about, what really happened in the last 2 weeks of the war, because there's very little in terms of stories about that in both cinema or literature in Germany. And there was a movie called Downfall, German movie, that was quite famous, that proposed that this cultural catastrophe between 33 and 45 was the result of one man, effectively, and that if he had listened to the saner voices around him, it could have been prevented. I very much don't agree with that. I believe many people had to agree with it or step out of its way for this to happen in this magnitude. Also wanted to make a movie not about the first rank of perpetrators, but I wanted to make a film about the 7th or 8th, row of perpetrators, the people you don't ever hear about, the people really who are your neighbors. And there was nothing like that in German cinema. I'm not a historian, but I'm a cinephile. And I found that very surprising, and I found it perhaps to be a symptom. There are only 2 films. One is the Wannsee Conference, where the final solution was agreed upon. This is from the late 70s. And then there's a fictionalized biography about Rudolf Höss, which is based on a French novel. And that's it. That's all we have. We don't have anything like La Comme Lucien, for example. We don't have anything like the Japanese cinema has, or the Spanish cinema has, or what Visconti did in Italy, or Pasolini about fascism. There was no real confrontational exorcism of this idea. We have many movies, and this is not a judgment, this is a fact, about the heroes. People who stood up against the system, and there should be films about the heroes who stand up, even if they're not successful. So I'm not saying don't make those films. I'm just observing that we have a lot of those and very few of the others. And you can ask a question about, why make a film from the perspective of the perpetrators? Well, because it poses a different set of questions to the audience. You don't have a moral manual delivered alongside the film. You don't have a character who you can hold on to in moral terms, who you can hide behind. So you're confronted with yourself, ultimately. And that's the goal of the film, to confront the audience with themselves and to make them think, and to hopefully make them not feel that this is all already a done deal. Because a lot of films in German cinema that deal with the past cut the present off from the past. They regard the past as something separate from today. And we didn't want to do that. I have issues with historical films that pretend that they're authentic. Nobody was alive at that time. How do you know what's authentic? You just did research. You just looked at photos. You looked at documents, which is what we did. So I think it's fair for historical film to cop to the fact that it's made today, looking back, looking at history in reverse, so to speak, just like all history that is written always is influenced by the biases of the times it is written in. That's why we have contemporary shots in the film. That's why there's a little bit of color in the film, just to say, no, the film is made today with our bias, with our interests, looking back at the past. And when I talk about the authenticity or the fetishism of authenticity in historical films, I'm mainly talking about the form, the idea that you can comprehend a time if you just get the car decals right, or if you get the costumes right. Then you sort of, then you're really representing an authentic view of the time, and that, of course, is utterly naive and preposterous. I did a lot of research. The film is based on historical fact. And I went to a city called Oldenburg, which is in the north of Germany, and I went to the State Archive, where they have the last still existing file of the military court proceedings where Herold was condemned to death alongside with several of his accomplices. And everything that happens in the film really happened. I mean, we did conflate certain characters. We did the things that you do when you adapt a historical occurrence. We left out some episodes, but basically what you see in the film is what really happened. The interesting thing, though, is that a lot of what happened, for example, how Herold finds the uniform, or whether he was a real deserter, or whether he ran away from the army, we only know from Herold himself. And since we know that he's not a reliable narrator, it's an interesting idea to also look at the fact that was handed down from him that I found in the court transcripts. That itself may not even be true. There's an anecdote about Martin Scorsese shooting test footage for Raging Bull. And he shot this test footage in color. And this was ringside footage where the fighters were hitting each other and blood was spurting. And Michael Powell, the late Michael Powell, a friend of Scorsese's and husband of Thelma Schoonmaker, and maybe the greatest thinker in European cinema in terms of color, and a fantastic, of course, master of the art, saw these test shots. And this master of color actually said to Scorsese, you cannot shoot this film in color because people will not be able to see past the violence. You have to shoot it in black and white so you get rid of the color red. You have to shoot it in black and white to create a bit of a distance so that people understand you're not making a violent film, but you're making a film about a very violent man. And there's a difference there, an important difference. It's the difference between making a movie about fascism and making a fascist movie. You know, in another Scorsese film, Taxi Driver is an interesting question. You know, my point of view and the way I use form in the film is really expresses my thoughts about it. So the absurdist, grotesque, farcical elements are really there to denounce a lot of what is happening on screen. It is my way to insert myself into the film without overtly stating my opinion by writing a certain type of dialogue for a character. You know, there's no the conventions of a movie like this is that there's always one good guy who kind of judges the people around him and who gives voice to maybe what we are thinking. And we don't have that, and we don't have that on purpose, because I think it leaves people a little hole to slip out through. And quite frankly, this kind of character is an invention of storytelling. It's a leftover from theater, where you have some voice on screen or on stage saying, hey, this is not good what's happening here. So in this particular fact-based story, nobody was there who said anything, you know, morally or ethically based. Morality as a category did not exist, and so we didn't include that. We didn't make that part up. It forces the audience to confront themselves and find their own answers about what is happening, and hopefully they will continue to think about it because of that. Because the other thing that I find is when you present the past or something that happened in the past as a contained unit, as a finite contained unit that has ended and whatever problems are being discussed have been solved, I feel like it allows the audience to say, oh, okay, it's one less thing we have to worry about. And you walk out and you're sort of pacified. And this film doesn't want to pacify you. This film wants to confront you, and it wants to not necessarily provoke you, but perhaps make you think about, you know, the relevance of it for today, and you know, hopefully it burns on for a while inside of you after you've seen it. You know, the difference between shooting a film with a big budget and shooting a film with a small budget are, in terms of production, almost not existent. Because I've never made a movie where I felt I had enough time or enough money, ever. That's one thing, but of course if you make a smaller film, if you make a film in Europe, or outside of the studio system, by the way, in the United States, because when we talk about Hollywood, what is that? What does that even mean? Are we talking about the Hollywood's classical narrative that is, you know, that has sort of calcified into some sort of truth from being a convention? Are we talking about the studio system? Are we talking about Hollywood as a geographical place? You know, it's all very. It's a question that I find very hard to to answer globally, but if we're talking about the studio system for a moment, I don't think you could have made this film in the studio system simply because of the way films are being developed within the studio system. There are a lot of layers, there are a lot of decisions and a lot of decision makers, and films in the studio system are a product. They are being paid for and they are expected to make a return for the people who paid for them. And so all decisions are geared toward increasing the appeal of the product, reaching as many customers as you can. Sometimes that results in films that cater to the lowest common denominator. But also sometimes, the studio system creates films that are actually really terrific films, that are great films, that utilize all the positive sides of the studio system to make a film that otherwise could not have been made. Okay, but again, this film, I think, breaks so many rules of storytelling in terms of how you describe characters, in terms of how you just the darkness of it, I suppose. And the fact that it's not a movie that is meant to be loved by everyone in the world. We knew from the get-go this film some people will hate, and that's okay. It's not a film that wants to be loved by everybody. It's not a film that is designed to please everybody. So I think therein lies the difference, that I specifically made a film, that I wanted to make. This is a story that I've been trying to figure out for 10 years. So this is a heart-blood film for me, and I don't think I would have been able to make it prior to when I actually made it. Both in terms of thinking and in terms of craft, I had to make all those other films and learn, how to make films by doing to be able to make this film. So it's a film that I wanted to make, very much so. It's a film that I knew had to be made in German. Because I don't think it would have been a believable proposition if you had, American actors or British actors pretending to be Germans, or Germans speaking with, British accents. The film itself, I think, could only be made the way it was made, for relatively little money, in Germany, as a German film. With that, of course, also came more freedom. There were just fewer people sitting around giving notes. And that's what I mean. You don't make the decisions based on what would most people like this to be, but you make decisions based on what is best for this particular film and for the way we want to tell this story. And once you have created sort of the propositions for the film, then that becomes your yardstick. How we make a film about violence, how can we responsibly show violence? That is a much bigger item that needs to be discussed than, you sure everybody's going to like this moment in the film? I have the greatest respect for directors who can work in the tentpole cosmos as well as in the independent film sector, such as Steven Soderbergh is a very good example, because I believe he gets to experiment and keep things very interesting for himself with his smaller films, and these experiments with the smaller films also then infuse and make more interesting his bigger films. So ideally, I would like to continue on the path of making films in Europe, not even just Germany, but in Europe. I am European. I have certain stories I would like to tell in Europe, but also at the same time continue to make films, tentpole films, but also some independent films in America. And I have never made an independent film in America, so I'm always interested in things I haven't done. And when you look at my resume, you'll see, I go from thriller to love story to comedy, and I really admire directors like Bresson or Dreyer, where you see one frame, it doesn't even have to, you just see a photo and it's a Bresson movie. For me, I was never interested in just reworking the same formal approach over and over to kind of make it more subtle and more and to explore that further. I always look at a story and I go, well, what does the story need? So again, I haven't made an independent film in the United States, and I think that's what I would like to do next.